Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Art Istanbul, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's lecture by Alexis Anne-Braun'un, organized by Art Istanbul and hosted by Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University, Faculty of Architecture. My name is Seda Altan, and I'm the director of Art Istanbul. It is a great pleasure and truly meaningful for us to be here once again at Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University, because this is not only a host institution for Aura, but the very place where our journey began. Each time we return here, it feels like a homecoming for us. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I would like to briefly introduce Aura Istanbul. Aura Istanbul stands for the Istanbul Architecture and Urbanism Research Academy, founded in 2017 as a non-profit organization. Aura was established as a research and experimentation platform for young architects, designers, and thinkers. At the core of the academy lies our research-based certificate program, which over the years has evolved into a space where architecture intersects with art, philosophy, urban studies, and theory. Beyond Istanbul, Aura also carries this approach to different regions through the campus project, which brings public talks, workshops, and academic encounters to Anatolian cities such as Trabzon, Erzurum, Muğla, Kayseri, Gaziantep, Antalya, Edirne, Eskişehir, and Adana, creating shared learning environments across universities and strengthening the dialogue. Over the years, Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University has become a key partner in sustaining and deepening these interdisciplinary conversations with Aura. Since 2018, Aura has been awarding architecture diploma projects at Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University Architecture Department, supporting young architects at the threshold of professional and academic life. Our collaboration has also taken shape through a series of public events hosted here at Mimar Sinan. In April 2024, we gathered for the Art and Architecture panel exploring shared territories between architecture and art with Juhani Palazma, Hüseyin Yanar, Samuli Woolston, Seppo Salminen, and Karina Kayikkonen. In December 2024, we had the great pleasure of hosting Bruce Ramos, whose lecture on media architecture opened new perspectives on light, technology, and spatial experience. This event also closely connects to Aura's ongoing work semester. During the fall term, we have been running a research-based design studio titled Art and Architecture Boundaries, led by Hüseyin Yanar, focusing on the intersections and shifting limits between architectural practice and artistic production. And today, for the third time, you are here continuing this dialogue and opening it once again to new questions and new ways of thinking. In this sense, Alexis Anne-Braun'un's lecture titled Implementation and Maintenance, Introducing Goodman's Theory of Art and Architecture, offers new perspective on how meaning is constructed and interpreted across art and architecture through the theoretical framework of Nelson Goodman. Before we begin, I would like to briefly share today's program with you. Following this welcome, we will first hear an opening speech by Yılmaz Değer, one of the founding members of Art Istanbul. After his remarks, Professor Ufuk Doğrusöz will introduce our guests and moderate today's talk. The lecture will last approximately 40 minutes to 1 hour. Will be followed by a question and answer session where we very much look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions. After the talk, we warmly invite you to stay with us for an informal gathering accompanied by the generous and delicious treats from Kahve Dünyası. And now, further ado, I would like to invite Yılmaz Değer to the stage for the opening speech.
Thank you, Seda. Dear guests, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University an institution that has played a key role in academic and intellectual foundations of Aura Istanbul. Our ongoing collaboration continues to create meaningful platforms for dialogue between architectural education, research, and critical practice. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the Department of Architecture for hosting this special event. I would like to thank Ufuk Doğrusöz for his valuable contribution to the organization of this event and for moderating today's talk. I would also like to thank Alexis Anne-Braun'un for kindly accepting our invitation and for joining us here today. Bringing together philosophy, aesthetics, and contemporary thought, this lecture will offer a meaningful contribution to our ongoing discussions, building upon the questions we have been exploring throughout this semester. Thank you very much. Now, Ufuk Doğrusöz, floor is yours.
İyi günler, hoş geldiniz hepinize. Ben onlar kadar becerikli İngilizce konuşamadığım için Türkçe konuşacağım. Ve orada yazıldığı gibi 15 dakika konuşmayacağım. Beni tanıyanlar rahatlıkla 15 dakikayı geçer bu adam derler ama ben kendimi kontrol etmeye çalışacağım. Şimdi tabii ki iki konu var size iletmek istediğim. Birincisi bugün neden bu konuyu ele alıyoruz ve bu konunun ele aldığımız kuramsal yapının, felsefi yapının dünya felsefe ve sanat ve mimarlık tarihindeki öneminden söz etmek istiyorum. Çünkü belki buraya gelinceye kadar sadece afişlerde gördüğünüz Nelson Goodman ismi sanat ve mimarlıkla bağdaştırdığımız sanat ve mimarlığın kuramı diye geçen Theory of Art and Architecture diye geçmesi boşuna değil. Ama daha da önemlisi Goodman'ın genellikle çok uzun ömründe çok önemli işler yapmasına rağmen özellikle Türkiye coğrafyasında ve hatta dünya coğrafyasında genelde mimarlık ve sanat üzerine yazdıklarının çok biliniyormuş gibi olmasına rağmen aslında gerçekten bilinmemesinden kaynaklanan bir merak oluşu bizi buraya kadar getirdi. Şöyle ki kaba bir şekilde söylersek en kabasıyla ki burada bitmeyecek büyük olasılıkla çok değerli bir konuğumuz var. Doktora tezini bu konuda Fransa'nın en önemli sanat ve mimarlık tarihçilerinden, felsefecilerinden biriyle yaptı ve Fransa'nın en prestijli okulunda genç yaşında profesörlük yapıyor. Nelson Goodman'ın ard arda yazdığı, 10-20 yılda bir yazdığı çok değerli yapıtları bugüne kadar gerek sanat, gerekse de mimarlık alanında köklü bir şekilde rasyonel, mantıklı, felsefi desteği çok kuvvetli olan bir okuma kuramı olduğunu söylemekle başlayabiliriz. Hatta bitirebiliriz bile. Şöyle demekte yarar var hatta. Mimarlık eğitimi yapan kardeşlerimiz çokça burada, öğretmen arkadaşlarımız da. Bugüne dek kuram ismini hak edecek kadar düzenli, kurgusu sağlam, mantıklı, rasyonalitesi tam anlamıyla oturmuş ve sınanmış, denenmiş bir kuram yok. Bunda iddiacıyım. Bir mimarlık yapıtı, bir sıradan mimarlık ürünü üzerine bir okuma yapılmaya kalktığında rahatlıkla söyleyebiliriz ki elimizde Goodman'ınkinin dışında hiçbir üniversal anlamda, evrensel anlamda geçerli bir kuramımız yok. Bunda herhangi bir kişiyle gerçekten tartışmaya hazırım. Evet yok. Ne kadar garip değil mi? Yani 1500'lerde dünyanın düz olduğunu, ya da olmadığını iddia edenler arasındaki boşluk kadar önemli bir boşluk var. Biz sübjektif, öznel sözler kullanarak biraz masalımsı, biraz retorik, biraz şiirsel olarak herhangi bir mimarlık yapıtı üzerine, onu kullananlar üzerinde söz söyleyebiliriz. Söyleyen de çok. Ama bir üniversitede, bir akademik yapısı güçlü bir yerde ayakları yere basan bir kurama dayanarak değil, çünkü yok. İddia ediyorum ki Nelson Goodman'ın geliştirdiği sanat ve mimarlık kuramının, ki oldukça zor olduğunu şimdiden söyleyeyim ve uyarayım sizi. Onun dışında ya bir şeyleri göstererek mimarlık betimlenir, mekan betimlenir, ya da biraz şiirsel laflarla şöyle bir betimlenir, öznel bir şekilde. Ben böyle düşünüyorum diye. Buna biz eleştiri diyebiliriz, biz buna deneme diyebiliriz. Ama bir üniversiteye yakışan sağlamlıkta kuramının ve kuramının arkasındaki felsefi yapı olan kuramımız hala yok. O nedenle az bilinmesi bir anlamlı bir olay değil. İyi bilinmemesi anlamlı bir olay değil. Bunun açıklamasını da yapabiliriz. Çünkü oldukça güç, oldukça zor. Hayatında hiç Carnap, Hempel okumamış birisinde Nelson Goodman okumak kolay değildir. Erken uyanmak, çok ekmek yemek gerekli bu iş için. Ama Nelson Goodman sadece bir felsefeci değil. Kurduğu mimarlık analizi, mimarlık okuma, sanat okuma kuramı en temel yapısında bir felsefenin üzerine kuruludur. Ve dünyanın 1920'ler, 30'lar, 40'larda bütün tartıştığı temel epistemolojik olgular, analitik felsefe sonrası diğer felsefelerle beraber önce onlarla tartışıp, onların arasından kendine yepyeni bir kurgu kurup, onun üzerine de olağanüstü büyük sanat ve mimarlık bilgisiyle kurduğu bir teori vardır. Bugün kardeşimiz, meslektaşımız Anne-Braun'un, Nelson Goodman'ın biraz felsefe bölümünü yanından geçerek teorisini, sanat ve mimarlık okuma kuramını büyük ölçüde bize anlatacak. Onu da bir şeyin kuruluşu, kurgulanışı ve onun sürekli hale gelmesini, yenilenmesini sağlayacak olan iki boyutunu. Ancak bu karmaşık, olağanüstü zengin, aslında karmaşık diyorum ama Nelson Goodman'ın kuramını şöyle bir özet olarak önümüze koyduğumuzda 8-10 tane temel köşe taşı bulabiliriz. Ama her bir köşe taşının içerisinde örneklemelerle neler olduğunu anlamamız biraz zaman alacaktır diyebiliriz bunun meraklıları için. Ancak benim öğretmen olarak fikrimi sorarsanız, bir sanat üniversitesi öğretmeni olarak, bunu bilmeden de sanat yaparsınız ama sanatı okuyamazsınız. Sanatı okurken sağlam temellerde, laf olsun diye söylenen laflarla, cümlelerle değil, örnek vermeyeceğim, polemik yapmak istemiyorum. Ama gerçekten bir kuramdan kalkarak okuma yapmak, sınamak, söylenenleri örneklemek için bu olmazsa olmaz. Tabii ki herkesin bu kadar geniş vakti olmaz ama özellikle genç arkadaşlarıma söylüyorum. Eğer iyi bir sanat ve mimarlık öğretmeni olmak istiyorsanız Nelson Goodman'dan geçmeden bu olmaz. Çünkü tek ciddi kuram o. Eğer gerçekten ya çok inanamadım söylediklerine derseniz yine birkaç fırın ekmek yiyip ben senin şununu beğenmedim diyecek boyuta gelebilirsiniz. O zaman gerçekten dünya sanat teorilerine katkıda bulunmuş olursunuz. Ama önce öğrenelim, Ondan sonra bakalım boyumuz yetecek mi? Bu moralinizi bozmak için söylemiyorum. Şimdi burada bu söylediğim mimarlığı, sanatı, herhangi bir sanat eserini, müzik dahil olmak üzere okumak için tasarımcısını, kompozitörü, yaptığı etkinlikleri ve bu etkinlikler sonucu oluşan yapıtı, mekanı ve onların insanlarla olan ilişkisini incelemek için elimizde çok zengin bir araç olacak. Mikroskoplarımız, bistürilerimiz, dürbünlerimiz burada en azından belli ölçülerde kulağımız ona alışacak. O nedenle hepinizi bugünkü konuğumuz olan Alexis Anne-Braun'un konferansını dinlemeye davet ediyorum. Alexis Anne-Braun doktorasını felsefe olarak çalışan Alexis Anne-Braun felsefesinin seçilen özel alanı olarak sanat ve mimarlık felsefesini çalıştı. Doktorasını Nelson Goodman üzerine yaptı ve bunu kitap olarak Fransa'nın en önemli felsefe kitapları yayıncısı Vren yayınlarında yayınlandı. Ve yeni birçok eseri de yine benzeri yayınlarda özellikle makaleleri yayınlanmaya devam ediyor. O nedenle biz Fransa'nın, hani bunu söylerken biraz bana söyleme dedi, en önemli okulu olan ve isimlerini bildiğiniz bütün Fransız felsefeci ve bilim insanı ve edebiyatçısının öğretmenlik yaptığı École Normale Supérieur'de genç bir hocamız olarak onu davet etmeyi biz tercih ettik. Onun bizi yanımızda durarak bu yola doğru çıkardığını göreceğiz. Ve gerekirse ve istek olursa bunun maintenance'ı, yani devamını da belki başka seminerlerle, koloklarla ayağımızın alışık olduğu aurada devam etmeye çalışırız da. Yılmaz Hocam. Alexis, je vous invite à nous rejoindre pour donner votre conférence.
Thank you, Ufuk. Thank you, Seda, for the introduction. Sorry, I am French, so I have a very strong French accent when I speak in English, and I know it's awful, but I will do my best. So I don't quite understand all what Ufuk said, but there is some words I got. Nelson Goodman, Carnap, Ample, Rational, Analytical, and Alexis Anne-Braun'un. And so in this lecture, I would like to present the theory of art and architecture developed by the American philosopher Nelson Goodman. However, I would like to begin with a concept that appears relatively lately in his work, and that has not been the focus of any truly in-depth philosophical analysis. I'm referring to the notion of implementation, which is also sometimes referred to as aesthetic activation. But I will begin my lecture by commenting on an artistic performance by the artist Mille Landerman Ukeles, which is reproduced on the poster of this event. I noticed that I'm now wearing a beard, and the picture was like taken 3 years ago. So yeah, life is also a story of aging and maintenance. But I would like to speak about this performance. Mille Landerman Ukeles is an American feminist artist who has been associated with the conceptual art movement. Her work falls within the realm of performance art, but she also uses other media, particularly text. In several of her works, she performs maintenance and cleaning tasks, making them visible to audiences who are not accustomed to considering or noticing them. In addition to her Maintenance Manifesto, excerpts of which were published by Art Forum magazine in 1971, she is known for her 1979 work Touch Sanitation, in which she photographed herself shaking hands with thousands of New York City sanitation workers while thanking them for taking care of public spaces. Some of her maintenance tasks are carried out in art institutions. This is Touch Sanitation. Some other works are carried out in art institutions, particularly in museum spaces. In the photograph you see here, the artist is cleaning the step at the entrance to the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum in Hartford. So this is a neo-Gothic building that also happens to be one of the oldest museums in the United States. She presented this work as part of an exhibition program organized by curator Lucy Lippard, a conceptual art theorist. This 1973 exhibition featured only female artists. Through this performance, in which she puts herself on display, Ukeles also exposes the gendered nature of the art of maintenance. Indeed, while creative tasks are normally assigned to men, the daily tasks of conservation and management of work, that is to say what anthropologist Fernando Dominguez-Rubio called mimography, tasks are often reserved for subordinate political identities, women or racialized people. The art of maintenance that Ukeles theorized in a manifesto first published in 1969 is therefore also a political gesture. So this is an excerpt of this 1969 manifesto. I propose to renew this gesture, but from the perspective of the philosophy of art, and why not metaphysics. Through this reflection, I would like to show that maintenance is an activity that has been neglected for a very long time. However, it will be in our philosophical interest to take a closer look at it, because the proper functioning of artworks and the preservation of what we may call their very sameness depend strongly on it. This is a quotation that I really like from this anthropologist, Fernando Dominguez-Rubio. You can see the cover on the right of the slide. The book is entitled Still Life, Ecologies of the Modern Imagination at the Art Museum. And this is what he said about mimographic labor. The museum is important because it is the machine that makes possible that most fragile and elusive forms, the forms of permanence. The museum is the machine making it possible that paintings made of seeds and plastics, sculptures made of wax and latex, performances made of eggs, installation made of candies, photograph made of gelatin, or video made of digital code do not become undone by the blind relentlessness of things. The museum can create the condition of a deferral that allows the image of permanence. This is the most important aesthetic labor that the museum has to perform. Later, in conclusion to this lecture, I would like to explore the metaphysical implication of this theory of maintenance in the arts, going beyond the theory of aesthetic functioning, once proposed by Nelson Goodman. As you may know better than I do, the question of maintenance is central to architecture. Everyone knows what happens to a building that is not preserved in its material being. In architecture, there is a concept associated with this, the concept of ruin. But ruin is also the metaphorical fate of all things and all artworks. This is another quotation by Fernando Dominguez-Rubio. A museum is not a collection of objects, but a collection of slowly unfolding disasters. This is what I would like to show here. I will use example from art and architecture, but please bear in mind that my approach is primarily philosophical, and I apologize if what I say seems obvious to you. A last image before I go on Nelson Goodman. So this is a photograph by German photographer Thomas Diemend. It is entitled Landing. It is based on a conservator photograph of an unfortunate incident at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, England. 5 years ago, 5 years before the art, this piece of art was created, a man tripped over his shoelaces, fell down the stairs, and knocked over 3 valuable Qing dynasty vases that he destroyed almost completely. Thomas Demond rephotographed the crime scene that he has reconstructed using cards and other materials. After this unfortunate event, the Qing dynasty vases have been repaired. That is part of what I just named maintenance activity. So now I'd like to present Nelson Goodman's theory of aesthetic functioning. This is the plan of this lecture, and so to take things in order, I will begin with Goodman's theory of aesthetic functioning, and then I will return to this concept of maintenance. It is true that the concept of implementation and maintenance were slowly developed in Nelson Goodman's work as the contour of his philosophy came to mirror those of a reflection on work of arts. To put it briefly, Goodman first got interested in the symptoms of aesthetic in his 1968 essay entitled Languages of Art. He then developed what we may call a functionalist theory of the artwork in a paper, a famous paper called When is Art, that is reproduced in the 1978 essay Ways of Wall-Making. Finally, a few years later, he proposed to complete his story by uncovering several other conditions of aesthetic experience. This other condition relates to what he calls implementation or activation. So let's start with the beginning of the story, which is quite long. What is the theory initially put forward in Languages of Art? The essay was published at a time Goodman was working on a project on art education at the Harvard School of Education. In this 1968 books, as often with Goodman, the essay is strangely constructed because it deals with a set of distinct problems. Expression in the arts, reference through images, the function of notation in art, the aesthetic statue of copies and forgery. Now, all these distinct problems ultimately come together at the end of the essay. This chapter 6, and in particular in the paragraph 5, entitled Symptoms of Aesthetics, Symptom of the Aesthetic, Goodman proposes a theory of aesthetic functioning that is one of the main entry points into his philosophical work. Goodman set out to examine the aesthetic relevance of the major characteristic of the various symbolic processes involved in our aesthetic experiences, and to this very end to identify symptoms rather than criteria of aesthetic functioning. Initially, Goodman's reflection focuses on symbolic systems in their great variety and extension. It just turns out that in our experience of art, we make very singular uses of symbolic systems. More precisely, we are attentive to certain properties and characteristics of symbolic systems that are not normally of interest in other practices, such as communicational exchange or scientific knowledge. I'm thinking, for example, of syntaxic density and saturation of some images. So here you can see a list of these symptoms of aesthetic functioning. I will try to explain what saturation is. This is a work by American artist Felix Gonzalez Torres entitled Bloodworks. It looks like diagrams, but saturation means that in a saturated symbol, everything is relevant to its interpretation. The ink which is used for the graphic signs, the thickness of the line, the unity of the series, the display, and so on. For this obvious reason, Bloodworks must not be read as a simple diagram, even if it is what it looks like at first glance. Bloodworks belongs to a minimal aesthetics, and it is also about AIDS crisis during the 1980s in USA. That a saturated symbol function most of the time aesthetically doesn't mean that it is always so, or that for this same reason it is a work of art. But in this very context, the fact that this diagram is saturated by meanings makes it a work of art. To be sure, there is no need to look for a definition of art in this text by Goodman, or even a definition of aesthetic experience. No necessary and sufficient conditions are listed that would make a certain object a work of art. No criteria are provided that would be common to all our aesthetic experience and could therefore be used to indicate their content. However, there are these symptoms, say Goodman. The term symptoms is interesting in itself. A symptom is precisely not a criterion. It leaves more room for play and ambiguity. You will also notice that these symptoms do not correspond to our pre-theoretical definitions of art or aesthetic experience in terms of properties like beauty or sublimity, or semantic practices like fiction or metaphor. Obviously, it is hard to summarize here a notion that Goodman gave a rather technical meaning. What is quite clear is that density and saturation, to take only these two symptoms for the moment, are characteristic of the syntax of nonverbal symbolic systems. Therefore, systems in which images count as elements, by contrast with more familiar, verbal, and literal symbols. Syntactic and semantic density also translates into a lack of differentiation between graphic marks, symbolic characters, and semantic reference within a given system, which play on richness but also ambivalence and requires us to pay constant attention to symbols and exercise a maximum sensitivity. This particular attention to the symbol or thing we experience, which is also a name for the aesthetic attitude, is therefore determined by the practice of a subject confronted with a symbolic functioning that is not oriented towards a purely communicational issue. Another symptom should be added to those I have already mentioned, the one of exemplification. I would like now to dwell on this one for a moment, for it is also the one that leads us to a study of meaning in architecture, as well as to a general theory of arts. To put it simply, we can see that a symbol that functions aesthetically usually fixes its reference through slightly roundabout and indirect means. Exemplification is one such mean. Then what is exemplification? Goodman defines it as a path. Goodman defines it as a path taken by the reference, but which is opposite to that of denotation. So in this work by Joseph Kossut, I use this to explain you what exemplification is. So you can see a definition of the chair. And this definition on the right of the picture is a direct denotation, a verbal direct denotation. On the left of the picture, you can see a photograph of a chair. That will be, in Goodman's term, a depiction. That is to say, description, but with images. And in the middle of the picture, you can see a chair. So you can interpret it as the reference of either a description of the chair or its images, but it could also be an example of a chair. So what is an example of a chair in this context? It is simply an object or a symbol that is denoted by the label or the name chair. So the direction of the reference is reversed from the one of denotation. And for this reason, in the case of exemplification, the symbol comes first and then come the meaning, because the label or the name will name the symbol. And this is perhaps a minimal characterization of how aesthetics in general work. Furthermore, exemplification implies possession of that to which it refers. For instance, a piece of red fabric is exemplify red because it is red itself. And in this painting by Italian artist Alighiero I Boetti, the painting is an example of a certain kind of red because it is painted with this very color. In fact, two colors, two different kinds of red. So in exemplification, there is a kind of intimacy between the thing, its materiality, and its reference. And this intimacy is also a symptom of aesthetic functioning. Goodman doesn't say it this way, but it becomes clear when he focuses on dense, poorly articulated and saturated syntaxes. For instance, a poem can exemplify melancholy through its very rhythm, rather than by describing melancholic states through the use of certain terms with denotative value. A contemporary art installation can exemplify certain processes of corruption, consumption, use, abuse, and material deterioration, rather than simply denoting them in a more direct but also more conventional way. There is plenty of famous works that go in this direction in contemporary art. One famous example would be African-American artist Kara Walker's gigantic sugar sphinx installation that obviously exemplifies something about corruption, consumption, use, and abuse of African-American people in times of slavery. And it does so because of the literal and metaphorical properties associated with sugar, like material decay, but also lust. The same is true, of course, of any architectural building. And then I draw on Goodman's famous text on meanings in architecture. It is entitled "Of Buildings Mean." I don't know if you are familiar with this text, but it is perhaps the best illustration Goodman ever produced of his own theory of art and his theory of aesthetic functioning. Perhaps it is all the more impressive and meaningful because an architectural building does not, at first glance, seem to fall into the category of symbols, and of course fulfills many other functions that have nothing to do with its purely aesthetic one. I quote Nelson Goodman: an architectural work usually has a practical function, such as protecting and facilitating certain activities. End of quote. But to say that a building is not only a symbol is perhaps a rather uninteresting observation. It is like saying, for example, that a painting is a painted canvas and not only a symbol. In certain contexts, saying that an architectural work is a mass of concrete, of building materials, or even assembled matter fulfilling a certain social function is not exactly wrong, but perhaps simply not relevant. For all this doesn't prevent the building from signifying all sorts of other things. To be sure, it is partly through what a building symbolizes that it can begin to function aesthetically. Of course, the building is not a representative symbol. In fact, it is rarely a representative symbol. This is the case when the form of the building literally represents its function, as in the National French Library, where I prepare this lecture. So the 4 building looks like books. Whatever the case may be with representation in architecture, which has its detractors as well as its supporter, particularly in the vernacular and postmodern architectural movement. Here you can see some other instance of what I'm saying. We can look at various other ways of symbolization in architecture. Not only representation, but also quotation, allusion, variation, expression, and of course, exemplification. These different ways help us understand what exactly is involved in a symbolic functioning that is aesthetic, in the sense of Goodman. As Goodman notes at the beginning of this text, being a work of art does not depend upon the maker's or anyone else's intention, but rather upon how the object in question function, that is to say, function as a symbol. This is a clear way of putting it, and it summarized the main thesis defined by Goodman in the other paper I mentioned, When is Art? In this important paper, arguably maybe his most famous one, Goodman takes a position in a debate that has been animating analytical aesthetics since the mid-50s. Is there a definition of art? Goodman's answer, along with a few others, is part of a project that could be characterized as a de-definition of art. Put it another way, it is a question of rethinking the problem of art definition, proposing something other than a set or list of conditions. So instead of the question what is art, he asks when is art. In this case, Goodman applies the result of his study on symbols and his theory of aesthetic symptoms. This reconception of art makes it possible, in particular, to understand the functioning of ready-made or conceptual art, which did not fit into the classical definition of artworks. What I find particularly interesting is that in this very text, Goodman draws an unusual parallel between the concept of art and that of an example or exemplifying symbols. So we are not quite done with the concept of exemplification. A symbol exemplifies a property when it possesses it and refers to it, by making this property manifest and drawing our attention towards it. This is what happens when a stone or a car bumper is displayed in a museum. It is also what happens when Claes Oldenburg digs a hole in a famous happening in Central Park, drawing our attention to a number of gestures he makes. As Goodman say, digging and filling a hole function as a work of art, insofar as our attention is directed towards it as an exemplifying symbols. The question of aesthetic function is therefore one of directing our attention in certain social contexts where a symbol is displayed as an example of this or that. For Nelson Goodman, just as an object can be a symbol at certain times and in certain circumstances, so too can an object be a work of art at certain times and not at others. The same is true for architectural work, of course. In fact, the stone on the road is a stone. In my hand, it is a tool. It is a tool or a projectile, and what matters are its properties of mass, grip, resistance, and so on. In a natural history museum, the stone will be an example of a natural kind. In a contemporary art museum, it exemplifies its form or color its nature, or as a found object, and therefore the very act of exhibiting it. Conversely, an artwork ceases to function aesthetically when it exemplifies other properties as financial value in a free port facility, or as combustible when we will use an old painting or a wood crucifix to start a fire. In this various photograph by Louise Lawler, you can see work of art that are not used as artworks, but for various other function and reason. It is therefore a reflection on the social circumstances that bear upon exemplification that leads Nelson Goodman to propose what I name a functionalist theory of art. An artwork is an object that functions in a certain way and therefore also in certain circumstances as an aesthetic symbol. This way of functioning is, of course, related to the symptom identified above, which allow us to characterize a certain type of functioning as aesthetic: density, saturation, multiple and complex reference, exemplification, and so on. Transposed to architecture, the question then becomes, when is a building a work of architectural art? And the answer for Goodman is when it functions as a symbol and when this functioning is of a certain type, exemplifying a particular property, expressing another one, conveying complex meanings, and so on and so on. This brings us back to the question of symptoms. As Goodman writes, it is only to the extent that it signifies, refers, symbolizes in some way that a building is a work of art. Here again, analysis of exemplification is particularly illuminating. To be sure, the cases Goodman studies in his paper provided a clear understanding of what exemplification means in the context of aesthetic function. Rietveld Schröder House makes the architectural construction itself, the build of the building, visible. It doesn't denote it, but exemplifies it. This type of process, which is a form of self-reflexivity, is part of the long history of artistic modernism. This way of self-exemplifying art-making can be found in the work of American artist Robert Morris' box with the sound of its own making. So this is literally a box which contains the sounds of its making. It can also be found in the building designed by Rogers and Piano for the Pompidou Museum in Paris. Indeed, it is the very example of a building that refers itself as a building by making its internal structure visible: pipes, gas lines, lifts, and so on. In a sense, this is also what the artist Ukeles does, but this time not with the demiurgic gesture of artistic creation, but with the more discreet gesture of maintaining objects and places of art. I will now leave these examples aside and take a broader view of Goodman's theory of aesthetic functioning. In addressing the question of aesthetic functioning, Goodman returns to familiar characterization of art. Intransitivity, the priority given to symbols, ambiguity and semantic richness, the particular embodiments of meaning. However, he bases his explanation of our aesthetic experience on characteristics other than emotion, immediacy, ineffability, and so on. That said, so far, there have been no question of considering the work of art and its aesthetic functioning in a broader social context, which would include institution, the relational properties of works, and everything that will later fall under the condition of activation of work. So that will be the final part of this lecture. a reflection about implementation and activation. Historically, this reflection comes later in Goodman philosophy. However, it is already hinted at in his exercise of de-definition of art. For Goodman already recognized the influence of social context on exemplificational practices. In a sense, institutional theories of art are right to show that a certain institutional framework, such as a public performance or an art exhibition, allows us to focus our attention on certain properties of the action or object on display. This is what led Goodman to gradually become interested in all the conditions of art, including those that have traditionally been thought of as secondary to creation. This perspective is developed in a series of texts that belongs to Goodman's later philosophy. I am thinking of Art in Action, but also of his lecture, one of my favorites, The End of the Museum. The starting point for Goodman's reflection is rooted in institutional criticism of museum. Goodman notes that in the museum environment, the aesthetic functioning of the work can be cancelled, interrupted, suspended. Of course, this is never as dramatic as when an old master painting is used to start a fire. Nevertheless, the gallery space can prevent us from accessing the full range of meanings in a work. This is highly paradoxical, since it is also what we could expect from museums. By the way, Goodman gives the following definition of a museum: a space supposed to make works function. However, this is only possible if the museum manages to overcome many obstacles, such as the strangeness of its environment or the blindness of its public. Several reasons are put forward for this difficulty. Economic ones, architectural ones, reasons related to the sociology of its public, and finally, reasons related to the museum's other tasks, namely conservation, protection of works, and management of visitors' flows. You can see that we are gradually beginning to enter into consideration that relates on the one hand to the sociology of reception and on the other to what could be called the daily management and maintenance of works. Indeed, Nelson Goodman recognized that a work can only function fully if the material, cognitive, and social conditions for its reception are all met. In this text, Art in Action, Goodman goes so far as to assert that what the work really is what it does. But it cannot do anything if there is no audience capable of receiving it, and it can only do something if nothing stands in the way of its action. In this final analysis of art, the concept of implementation is therefore developed by Goodman as a tool for removing the possibility and reality of these obstacles and impediments to aesthetic functioning. Implementation is what puts art into action and enables the audience to receive it. Put it another way, implementation is precisely defined as the aesthetic activation of the work according to the criteria of functioning that I have tried to describe below. So here are some quotations where Goodman tried to distinguish implementation and execution, and implementation and creation of work. While implementation makes the proper functioning of the work possible, it doesn't expose itself to view. Is it as if it were separated from the two main dramas of philosophical discourses on art, the drama of creation on the one hand and the drama of interpretation on the other? And it is for this very reason that implementation, activation, or maintenance have not been the subject of sustained philosophical reflection. Implementation thus includes all the processes that go with the reception and production of the work, and which are sometimes intertwined with the means of execution. The framing of an image, its exhibition, its possible restoration, listening or reading devices, the publication of a literary work, its distribution, cleaning, and maintenance itself. In fact, Goodman's entire text is based on this new distinction he makes between making and implementation. Making is the act of creation. It involves a particular artistic agency, like writing, composing, shaping, carving, drawing, and so on. Implementation is a secondary device, distinct from creation, which is designed to ensure the maintenance of the aesthetic function of the work once produced. So here are other quotations by Goodman in this text, implementation in the arts, and always illustrated with a Louise Lawler photograph of artworks in non-aesthetic functioning. And that's some illustration of what Goodman puts behind the notion of maintenance. By way of conclusion, I would like to draw on this very distinction between making and maintenance to propose a few metaphysical developments. Obviously, I can only sketch out here a project that has been driving me for some time. As I've tried to demonstrate, what a work of art does and performs depends on the one hand on our ability to receive it, and on the other hand on the social and material condition on which its functioning depends. For example, the work must be well preserved, contemporary art must be well installed, displayed, painting must be well hung and well lit, and so on. This means that the entire biographical trajectory of the work, socially, historically, and institutionally determined, cannot be eliminated from a metaphysical reflection on the work of art and its very identity. And what I mean by metaphysical is a discourse on the essence, a discourse about what a work of art is. Therefore, I read Goodman's focus on the question of implementation as an invitation to restore the work to its fundamental precariousness, interpretative precariousness, of course, but also more basically material precariousness. The story of the maintenance of artworks allows us to think in this way. Art existence and artworks' identities are about a continued existence. For what the notion of maintenance reminds us quite clearly is that in order for work to produce its effects on a public, an audience, and so on, and thus to show, and therefore to show what it is in fact essential that a group of actors and experts strive to hold together its parts and everything that composes it. The hypothesis I propose will be the following one. Not only is maintenance a condition for the work to function, but it may also be what ensures the work identity to itself. In saying this, I'm departing from the framework developed by Goodman with his theory of aesthetic functioning. But I believe there are political, historical, and metaphysical reasons that justify departing from this framework today. These reasons are linked to transformation in our artistic practices and to a growing awareness of the precariousness of things. I will now conclude by returning to the photograph of Miller and Lederman Ukeles's performance. What this image shows is an act of maintenance, in this case, cleaning. To use Goodman's vocabulary, we could say that her work exemplifies an act of maintenance and cleaning, which generally go unnoticed, even though they make our experience of art possible. The additional interpretative step I propose is to re-examine works of art as things that depend essentially in their very existence on these maintenance activities. In short, the existence of the artworks, both its material existence and its aesthetic existence, is an existence that could well be essentially a maintained existence. Thank you for your attention. I'm done.
Now we can have some questions and some comments, if you like.
Thank you, Alexis, for this very interesting talk. I'm just wondering, can we relate Goodman's theory with Charles Sanders Peirce's triad of signs, icons, and indexes? For example, in this sense, when I'm thinking about the Sanders Peirce's theory, he says that, for example, the icons located on the maps, they resemble the actual buildings. For example, a very small icon of a house. It resembles to an actual house, or a functional building like an educational facility or a religious building icon. It actually signs the real building. I don't know, is it possible, but can we name the Sanders Peirce's theory as a pre-theory before the Goodman?
Yeah, of course, Goodman knows very well Peirce, and he does something of the distinction between icons and symbols. And I would say that
It says,
and yeah, I let indexes for now. And the distinction I draw between description and depiction when I was presenting Goodman's theory of exemplification and denotation is directly linked to Peirce's distinction between symbols on the one hand and icon on the other one, because verbal descriptions are conventional and they have nothing to do with their reference. It's only a convention, whereas depiction could be thought as having some kind of resemblance with what it refers to for Peirce. But Goodman is not very at ease with this idea of iconic resemblance. And in some of his work, he even tries to demonstrate that pictures do not resemble their reference. So it was not very clear with this photograph because, of course, when we see a photograph of a chair, we want to say, yeah, it is a chair because it resembles a chair. But for Goodman, resemblance is a cultural and historical construction, and there is nothing real in resemblance. So he even wrote a small paper called 7 Structures on Resemblance, where he is really against Peirce. But it doesn't mean that he is not influenced by him. And but for the third notion, the notion of index, I always found curious that there is no mention of it in Goodman's work. So it is as if he didn't do anything with this idea of index. But maybe in the case of exemplification, there is something indexical, but
Ben bir şey söyleyeyim. Alexis'in kitaplarından, yazılarından bir tanesinde Franklin Lloyd Wright'ın Şelale Evi'ne dair bir kendi deneyimini yazmıştı. Onu soracağım. Şu anda renovasyonda o ev. Hepimizin çok iyi bildiği bir şey. Ama çok enteresan şeyler anlatmıştı. Ve de onu anlatırken de Goodman'ın teorisinde özellikle sembollerin işleyişi konusunu ve onun güncellemesini, maintenance'ını anlatmıştı. Onu sormak istiyordum izninizle. Tu avais écrit un passage dans ton livre, je pense, ou bien dans un article, sur la maison de Frank Lloyd Wright et la transformation qui ont été effectuées pour la muséification de la chose. Et tu avais écrit des choses qui m'ont beaucoup intéressé. Peux-tu nous en parler un petit peu de ça, de cette transformation? Est-ce que c'est une maintenance? Et qu'est-ce qui se passe après une œuvre comme ça?
So yeah, Ufuk is referring to a text I have written for my PhD thesis. And my supervisor is a philosopher. His name is Jocelyn Benoit, and he spends a lot of time in Chicago, which is the native town of Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous American architect. And so in Jocelyn Benoit books, there is always numerous references to Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings. And he described one of his visits to the Frank Lloyd Wright studio in Chicago, in Oak Park, and he asked himself if this studio is some kind of representation of Frank Lloyd Wright's original studio, or if it is really the studio. So it's a text that is about the difference between reality and representation, and he was quite disturbed by the visit he has made at the time. And so in my text, I also write about my own experience of visiting the Frank Lloyd Wright studio, and I was really surprised because some part of the of the furniture you can see when you visit the studio are authentic one. I mean, there are the original furniture that belong to Frank Lloyd Wright family, and other are just put for only decoration. And in the Frank Lloyd Wright library, there is plenty of books you can see, and so I was wondering myself if these books were original. And the guy who did the tour told me when I asked the question that was only some random books they put in the library in the shelf to decorate the studio. And so I also do I have also some reflection about the difference between representation and reality. And Nathan Goodman's concept of exemplification is a useful tool to examine this very strange moves between reality and representation. And what I wrote is that the studio you can visit is an example of the original studio, but it is not the original one. That is to say, it exemplifies some of its property, but not all the property. So exemplification is always normative, and something is never exemplify all the property it possesses. It only exemplifies some of its property to which it does exhibit. So when I show you this pen, it's an example of a pen, but not an example of its price, of its material, and so on. So in an act of exemplification, there is always norms that are implicated. Norms of exhibition, norm of exemplification, and sometimes there is confusion because you take something as an example of something else, and the one before you doesn't understand the way you understand it.
Thank you, Alexis. I would like to express my sincere thanks to Professor Ufuk Doğrusöz, who contributed to the organization of the unique conference, particularly Aura Istanbul, and to Alexis Anne-Braun'un, who, drawing on many years of experience, has graciously shared his philosophical knowledge and architecture and art with us. Thank you. Alexis, I one question for you. If architecture in your approach and also in Goodman's approach is understood as a symbolic practice that produces meaning, where do you locate the threshold that distinguishes architecture from other cultural practices? At what point does something begin to count an architecture for you and for Goodman, you think?
Yeah, I can answer for me. I don't know for Goodman, but I think he would answer the same. So an architectural building, it fulfills a lot of social function, like protecting the human body, being a house, being a hospital, being a town hall, or whatever function it can fulfill. So that is what distinguishes architecture from other kind of cultural practices. It is the social functions it fulfills. But when we say that building as a function, we doesn't say all the story. And what Goodman does is to show that when a building is an artwork, most of the times it is because it symbolizes things in some very specific ways, and these ways are connected to the symptoms of aesthetic functioning that I try to present during my lecture. So saturation, exemplification, complex reference, and so on. And that's what make some building not only a building that fulfill function, but also an artworks for Goodman. Yeah, I don't know if I answer your question, but
if an architectural work don't symbolize something, if it only symbolizes itself, we cannot say that it is an art.
With the example of the Centre Pompidou in Paris, I said that it is a building that exemplifies itself as a building, and but it's only its external structure that is part of the story of exemplification. But inside the building, there is spaces for social function. Spaces for exhibiting art, spaces for exhibiting films, for a bookshop, and so on. So what is artistic in this architectural gesture is to exemplify the very property a building possesses, like lifts, gas lines, and other kind of internal structure, and it put it at the outside. So that's a very radical gesture, and in my sense, it is connected with this idea of exemplification. But it is not an example Goodman gave in his paper of building. He comments the Rietveld Schroeder house.
Thank you.
I'm trying to make up a question which is about architect and the work of architecture. If I imagined an architect making two exactly similar buildings with the same functions in two different areas or in two different parts of the world, and how can we identify this according to Goodman's theory, as you can explain maybe better than me, of course. But what is the most important symbolic, the architect or the piece of architecture, which is exactly the same, but in a different environment with the same functions? What does it exemplify? What does it exemplify? I don't know. It's a question like that, a little different, but thank you for your answer, Alex.
Thank you for your question. That is really Goodmanian in fashion, yeah. So Goodman would love this question because he was all his life interested in the difference between two different kind of works. The one he called autographic and the ones he called allographic. So I don't know if you're familiar with this distinction. I didn't mention it during my talk, but an art form that is autographic, it's a very identity. So what make the work it is connected to the story, is total history from the creation to the reception of the work. So it is very important for its identity that it has been made by this architect or this artist and not another one. So it is obvious that most of paintings are autographic because we are very concerned in painting that we are looking the original and not one of its copy. But with allographic art form, what defines the identity of artwork is a structure. In literature, it will be a verbal structure. In music, it will be a sound structure. And whatever who composed the structure, we are listening the very same piece of music if we are listening the good sound structure. And the question is architecture autographic art or an allographic art? And it is a very difficult question because I think it depends on a lot of things. And some piece of architecture are allographic for sure, because we don't care about who design the plans or the structure. We just want the building to fulfill a function like housing or a fortress, and whatever the name of the architect we did it. But for other building, it is very, very important that it belongs to historical practices, to this architect and not another one. And then it will be an autographic form. That's the case for most of the famous architecture buildings that have aesthetic value. But there was also a second question in your question, and it was about the place we do to environments and context in architecture or sites. And it is true that most of architectural buildings that are site-specific. And I mean by site-specific that their aesthetic properties are connected, are related to their environment. So if we build in Paris a mosque that looks like your famous mosque in Istanbul, I don't think it would have the same aesthetic properties. I doubt it. It will be like a kind of forgery.
Bu yönde bir soru sorayım. Sunumunda tabii ki bütün Goodman'ın bütün kuramının her boyutunu ele alması olanaksızdı demek söylediğim gibi kapıları açmak için buradayız. Arkadaşımızın sorusuna alografik, otografik diye adlandırdığı Goodman'ın kuramında bir boyut vardı. Ona uzunca yanıt verdi ama en azından bir bölümüne yanıt verdi. Tu as pu répondre à une question qui manquait ou bien tu pouvais ne pas faire tout en une seule fois par les termes conceptuel, allographique, autographique. C'était une excellente dimension de la thèse de Goodman et aussi de la question de Gökhan Koçyiğit qui ouvrait vers aussi de notre collègue là sur ce qu'on appelle symbole ou bien la théorie des symboles. Ce n'est pas tout à fait, je dirais, exactement le terme convenu du mot symbole, parce que là, c'est une autre dimension. Tu as excellemment expliqué le fonctionnement symbolique, qui est autre chose et qui nécessite un développement par le travail de tout un chacun qui s'intéresse. Bu kuramın içerisindeki önemli bir boyutu otografik, allografik terimleriyle açıkladı sorunun üzerine Alexis Anne-Braun'un. Aynı zamanda Gökhan Koçyiğit'in semboller üzerine bir diğer arkadaşımızın sorduğu gibi çeşitli teorilerde sembol teorileri var. Bu sembol teorilerin içerisinde Goodman'ın sembol teorisi, sembol diye adlandırılabilecek ama herkesin anladığı gibi sıradan bir sembol sözcüğünden değil, başka türlü bir çalışmayla anlamak zorunda kaldığımız, hatta çalışma diyerek function'ın nasıl işliyor bu iş? Boyut bambaşka bir şey. Yani sembolün kendisi değil de sembollerden oluşan dünyanın nasıl insanlar tarafından işletildiği, gerek tasarımcı gerekse de kullanıcılar açısından bu bambaşka bir boyut ve nitekim bu da bizim önümüze çok önemli kuramsal perspektifler açıyor. Benim belki yine az vakti olduğundan, Goodman'ın teorisinin çok önemli bir boyutu olduğundan ve burada gerek tezlerinde ya gerek tez yönetimlerinde notasyon kuramı var Goodman'ın. Çok geliştirilmiş, çok zengin bir kuram. Ondan 2 dakika söz etmesini rica edeceğim Alexis'den. Il y a parmi les dimensions de la théorie globale de Goodman, il y a tout un développement très important sur les questions de notation musicale, architecturale ou autre. Est-ce que tu peux nous en parler juste un petit peu pour que nos collègues qui s'intéressent à ce domaine puissent savoir aussi ce que peut dire quelqu'un en partant de Goodman? Merci.
Yeah, so of course I didn't present all the aspects of Goodman's theory of symbol. And, but I say that Languages of Art, the book of 1968, is very strangely constructed because Goodman tried to solve very different kind of problems. And the first argumentative line in the book is a very old one in the history of philosophy and aesthetic. And Goodman tries to answer the following question: what is the difference between a text and an image? So it's this classic distinction between text and image. And in the first 2 chapters, he tries to understand what is the depiction, so reference by image. And it is also in the chapter 2 that Goodman presents his theory of exemplification, because it is connected to this theory of expression in the art and metaphorical uses of images. So that's the 2 first chapters. Then in chapter 3, Goodman asked a very different question, which is, what is the difference between an original and a copy in art? What is the aesthetic status of forgeries? So it is connected to a Nevin question, and it is in this chapter 3, that Goodman introduced this distinction between autographic and allographic art. Then there is 2 very technical chapters, chapter 4 and 5, in languages of art, and Goodman developed what we call the theory of notation in the arts, and it is connected to its definition of allographic art, because he says that what defines an allographic form, it is that an artwork in this allographic form has a defined structure. So we have to understand what is the structure of a musical artwork, or a literary artwork, or an architectural artwork. And for each medium, and for each art form, there is some notation that allows to define the structure of the work. So in music, this notation would be musical notation, and in France we call it partition, score in English. So the score, the musical score, is a perfect notation that allows to indicate all the very important aspects of a musical work: measure, rhythm, tempo, and so on and so on. And so, if we know how to read a musical score, we can execute. We can execute the score and have a correct instance of it. So that's a very good notation for Goodman. In architecture, I don't know if we have something equivalent to musical score. Maybe sketch, or I don't know, plan, technical plan will do the job, but maybe with some lack, or I don't know. If you want contacts to Goodman Estates to translate it in a real edition, I can give you. So in this book, Ways of Wall Making, it's a collection of different essays. I've mentioned one of these essays, that is When is Art, and in the other essay they are more metaphysical. And Goodman introduced this concept of wall making. So what he says in a few words is that we do walled version using different kind of symbols. And for Goodman, there is no real world beyond all this version. So we are all world maker in our life, because we are constantly doing world with just in using symbols and referring to the world. So there is not a given world, and then we try to interpret it to give meaning to the world, but we are building the world as we interpret it, or as we refer to it. Yeah, it started in the 70s, I think. Yeah, a bit after, because I mean, the first paper that has been translated into French was Fact, Fiction and Forecast, which is a very technical essay about induction. And it was translated in 1980, so long time ago, because philosophers of sciences were very interested into this new riddle of induction. So that was the first text that was translated into French. And then in the 90s and in the early 2000, most of his famous books were translated by three philosophers, Roger Puivet, Jacques Morizot, and Jean-Pierre Cometti. And now they are all retired. And I'm part of the new generation that are interested into Goodman's philosophy. And with other colleagues, we translated the other books, which are maybe less important. So we had the leftovers.
Je vais te poser une question hors sujet, mais en plein sujet. Qu'est-ce que tu peux dire de l'état actuel des orientations dominantes ou qui ont plus ou moins fait assise en philosophie, parce que c'était toujours une question posée de l'extérieur par rapport à l'influence des post-structuralistes, etc. Est-ce que tu peux répondre à cette question-là? Comment la philosophie française a pu se transformer dans les 40 dernières années? Tu peux ne pas répondre ou bien appeler ton avocat. Şu soruyu sordum. Konumuz dışında ama istersen yanıt verme yahut da verebilirsin. İzin aldık Aura'nın sorumlularından. Fransa'nın en önemli kurumunda olduğu için Fransa'da bu kurum 1960'lı 70'li yıllarda belli ölçülerde bir felsefeyi çok fazla savunan ve dünyada belli bir egemenlik kuran ve daha sonra geri çekilen ve artık benim kanımca geçerliliği kalmamış bir felsefenin başlangıcıydı ve Fransız felsefesinin büyük bir değişimine tanık olduğumuzu görüyoruz 1985'lerden beri. Bu konuda kendisinin tam bu işin göbeğinde olduğu için düşüncesini istedim.
So the question is a bit extra large. And I don't know what to say about the last 40 years of philosophy in France. I think there is many different tradition, and what is new maybe is that I think for at least 20 years now, the story of a big divide between analytic philosophy and continental philosophy. I don't know if you are familiar with this divide. I think it's over and it's behind us. So I think every good philosopher try to do philosophy with all the tradition, either analytical or continental, what Ufuk call structuralist or post-structuralist or whatever. And I try to do also constant bridges between these two different traditions. And I think there is, I mean, Goodman could be very inspiring for people interested in post-structuralism and even by political philosophy or gender studies, and that's what I try to do even today. Speaking about maintenance, because I think it's a very main topic in philosophy, and a lot of things are maintained, and it has political meanings. Maintenance. You can maintain an artwork or building, but you can also maintain a gender or population or a body or a lot of things. And with the example, I try to show you. It is my goal, my philosophical goal, to demonstrate that we can both use Goodman on other kind of philosophy and philosophical tradition, and but beside me, I think maybe, I mean, there is a lot of renewals of old traditions. There is a very a new phenomenology in France connected to anthropology. We call it anthropologie philosophique, and there is also what we name new realism. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was very big debate 10 years ago. And I was part of the debate, and it was because Goodman is not a realist. He called himself an irrealist, because for him there is no world. We only build a world version of it. And yeah. Maybe there was a question behind your question.
Je pense que tu es suffisamment fatigué et c'est bon, merci. Bir soruda il y a une autre question là.
Hi, hello, yes. Thank you. It was a really interesting experience for me because it's apparent that it's a very dense text. And I haven't read it. And from what you explained, I derived certain things, and I feel a need to check if those are correct. And maybe that will open up like something for people too. So for his understanding of architecture as an artwork, and what you described as semantic density, which I take as kind of synonymous to symbol, like symbolism, like a symbol is dense semantically because it's representing a meaning. If that's correct, I'll...
Yeah, I didn't was very clear about what is semantic density. I mostly spoke about saturation, but semantic density means that something as very could be interpreted in very different ways. So, for instance, in poetry, the text is very semantically dense, whereas if you use a recipe for cooking, a cook recipe, it will be very
straightforward.
Yeah, straightforward.
Yeah, I see. So in that way of formulating art as a semantically dense thing.
Yeah, that's one of the 5 symptoms, yeah.
And when we think about architecture, well, it's interesting to call something art versus artwork, I guess, because architecture or a building is something we can inhabit and it lives, and that question of implementation and maintenance is already in it. Like, it's not in a museum and it's being maintained, it's living, and those two things are a part of it. For it to be artful, here you can see I'm confused because it's confusing, but
no, you're not.
That sense of denseness in semantics, sometimes it's something to like stay away from in art. And I don't know if this is a value judgment in any way that Goodman is doing, like for art to be art, because art is kind of like, oh, it's art, you know. And for to call a work of architecture, a building, art is honoring it, like it's, you know. So when we say that, for example, the building you showed, Centre Pompidou, I guess it was, where we could see the infrastructure and the pipes. Yeah. So yes, this one, like, I can see that it's semantically dense because it thinks about what a building is. So in a way, it's a sculpture of a building too. But when we call that a symptom of aesthetics, and of course it's a question of description and definition, and in my mind, aesthetics has to do with harmony more than the intellect, and in a way they would be different categories of talking about art. So does Goodman subordinate intellect into aesthetics and make it a necessary point for something to be worthy of aesthetics to speak to the intellect by being semantically dense or like symbolic? Hence, can you follow? Am I even following myself? But, you know, did you get it? I think.
I mean, one of the main goal in languages of art is to say that art is cognitive. I mean, art belongs to the activity of world making and of understanding worlds around us. So art could be a kind of cognitive tool to understanding what is around us. So for Goodman, art is not connected to emotion or what you say.
Harmony.
Harmony. Yeah, maybe harmony is not emotion, but he really wants to show that we need to be very attentive to how the symbol function to be in a kind of aesthetic experience of things. So you're right in this respect. It's a very intellectualist approach to art, and I think it has its own value, but it doesn't say everything about art. And but I think Goodman is right to say that even when emotion is involved, we need concepts and we need symbols to give a form to this emotion. And the second part of my answer is about semantic density. It's one of the many symptoms of aesthetic functioning, but it is not for the reason that a symbol is semantically rich, that it is an artwork. And a scientific text could be very dense in terms of semantics, or even a scientific diagram could be very dense in terms of syntax. But what Goodman says is there are these symptoms, and if you get all the symptoms together, there is, many chances that you are confronted to artworks. But it's not necessary condition. So you can have artworks even with none of these symptoms. So it's kind of, symptoms is how we say in English, is not symptoms is like when you have a disease. So symptoms make you on the path to discover what is going on inside you, but sometimes it's not a proof of what affects you. It's not the same that a real proof, a very real scientific proof. And Goodman doesn't want to give proofs of aesthetic functioning. So he wants to give room for play and ambiguity, and I don't know if I'm clear.
I see. So you mean like it's a post-event thing when it's a symptom? It's already an artwork, and these are the symptoms. Potentially, that could mean that it's an artwork, but it's not a check mark that you have to derive. Okay.
And sometimes you have an artwork, but it doesn't. The artwork doesn't function aesthetically because you don't do anything of it, as in the case, or you use an oil painting to start a fire. There is no doubt with the fact that you are in presence of an artworks, but it doesn't it doesn't give birth to an aesthetic experience of it. So it's a completely different point of view, the point of view of aesthetic functioning and the question of is it an artwork or not? You see in this photograph, these are artwork before they travel or before they are being sold or whatever, but they don't function aesthetically because we cannot see them or because they are not well displayed, well lit, and so on. So we have to implement artworks to make them function aesthetically, but it's another question, and that's a new question Goodman raised at this time, and I think it's interesting, but it doesn't answer the question, what is art?
It takes it as a social event, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah. Thank you.